Welcome, guys. Another one of our sessions. Today we're going to cover Burgundy and, in the end, a little bit of Champagne as well. It's going to be quite an intense session, I reckon, because Burgundy is quite an intense region, but I think it's kind of instrumental to understand it, so we can then move on to the other regions later on as well. So some of you are asking who the guy in the back is. So this is a very important guy in Burgundy. He is Aubert de Villaine. He is the proprietor of the estate that is on the picture in front of you, this Romanée Conti thing, which is one of the most important wineries in the world. And I'll talk about it more later on, but basically he's a pretty serious guy. All right, so let's get started. The plan for today, obviously, let's start with the recap. So who wants to talk me through a little bit what we talked about on Tuesday? Julie, your mic is coming on, so I guess your go. Come on, don't be shy.
No, seriously, you're talking about me?
Yes, I'm talking about you. Let's go. So what did we talk about last time?
So we did the recap from the previous week. I didn't tell you. Do it yourself.
All right. Do we have anybody else that wants to tell us what we talked about? Really, guys? You are very in the mood today.
We was talking about the history of the wine.
Yeah.
The terroir. Terroir, of course. Who starts to make wine?
Okay, so where did we hear of wine first? What were the first mentions of wine? How long ago was that?
How long?
Yeah.
I remember in Georgia and Armenia, but I didn't understand exactly when I started. Like 6 years ago, but I don't know, before BC.
6,000 years ago.
Oh, 6,000. Sorry.
That
Yeah, I was surprised because after you was talking about China, that was 7,000, no?
Correct. So 7,000 BC, not just 7,000 years ago, but 7,000.
Yeah, BC, exactly.
Years ago. So yes, China was. They found some remains of potential wine sediment. So it's thought that China made it actually even before the Armenians and Georgians and so on and so forth. What else did we talk about? Who remembers where the oldest still living vine in the world is?
Slovenia.
Yeah, there we go. Bit of a shout out. Okay, the other things we talked about, we just covered Burgundy a little bit. We covered the terroir, like I said. We were talking about the monks. We were talking about how they were responsible for developing new practices and just kind of improving, and they're the main reason why the French have always been kind of the staple of proper wine. Okay. All right, so today we're going to cover more about Burgundy, like I said. So we're going to start with Chardonnay. We're going to talk a little bit about it. We're going to talk about Pinot Noir. Then we're going to talk about appellations and rules to actually understand what appellations are. We're going to talk about the major crus and producers. So I'm actually not going to focus on, so if you look at the map over here, you've got Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais. These are sorry?
Sorry.
So Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais are both relatively bulk wine producers, so they're not renowned for their quality. Not that there isn't high quality, but I've decided we're going to avoid those, and we're going to focus more on the kind of a premium market. So we're going to talk about Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuits a little bit more. So these are the two up in the north, and also Chablis. So like I said, the reason for this is simply because the southern guys, the Chalonnais and the Mâconnais, all they're really trying to do is be the northern guys. It doesn't happen the other way. Nobody from Côte de Beaune says, oh, I wish I had a wine like Puy Fusé, for example. right? It's always the other way around. So if we understand the north, then it makes it easier to understand the south as well. So we're not going to cover that too much. So like I said, we're going to talk about major crus and producers, and we're going to talk about some exceptions. And lastly, we're going to just kind of briefly go through Champagne. I don't want to waste, not that it's a waste of time on Champagne, but it's a very big rabbit hole and I don't want to go down it too far. Okay, so let's start with Chardonnay. So Chardonnay, obviously a white grape. You can see a picture of it in front of you. It is the main white grape in Burgundy. It's quite famous for being fairly neutral. It doesn't really have a lot of aromatics. It doesn't jump out of the glass. It doesn't make you taste a million of different aromas. However, it's exceptional at showcasing terroir. So basically, this is why it's so revered in Burgundy, because like we talked about in the last session, when the monks were working in Burgundy, they noticed how vineyards taste different to each other. And Chardonnay is very susceptible to that. It shows that very well. So you can kind of taste exactly where it comes from. You might hear of wines like Montrachet or Chassin Montrachet or Meursault, and they're literally villages that touch each other, but the wines are absolutely completely different. So that's quite great about Chardonnay. It's also very versatile. So in spite of being the main grape in Burgundy and considered to be a high-class premium grape, you can find it anywhere in the world. Pretty much every winemaking country has at least one region that grows Chardonnay. It ranges from super cheapo wines all the way up to super premiums, but obviously consistently the most expensive ones you'll find in Burgundy. The other grape we're going to talk about is Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir is the main red grape in Burgundy. It is, maybe you can actually tell by the picture, but it's a very thin-skinned grape, which makes it very fussy and difficult to grow. So Pinot Noir is very difficult to get right, but if you do get it right, it's absolutely spectacular. And it's probably one of the best grapes in the world at, again, similar to Chardonnay, showcasing terroir, showcasing where it's from, and just kind of delivering some elegance and classiness. Okay. It develops layers and layers of complexity. When it's young, it's all about the fruits. It's all about like red fruits and berries and flavors like that. But then as it goes older, it turns into a more earthier, more vegetal, more leathery style, which makes it quite interesting. So it's incredibly well interesting as a wine, especially as it ages a little bit. You won't find a lot of Pinots that are very, very old. Now, the reason for that is we didn't really cover this in the basics, but I think now it might be an interesting time to cover it. But when you want to age a wine, it needs to have certain components, right? It needs to be relatively high in alcohol. It needs to have relatively high acidity, relatively high tannins. The reason why it needs to have tannins, for example, is because tannins are natural preservatives. So they prevent over-oxygenation. Tannins are found in the skins. So if we look back at the characteristics of Pinot, so it's thin-skinned, which means it doesn't really have that much tannin. So it makes it decent for aging in terms of flavor, but not very decent in very, very long-term aging. So you won't find Pinots with 40, 50, 60-year-old that are still fresh. But you need wines that are bolder and more serious. All right. Any questions so far? Feel free to interrupt me at any point, guys. If I'm going too fast, if I'm not explaining something right, and so on. Okay.
What you reckon is the time you can like age, let's say, a Pinot?
So you can't say that for sure. So that's the magic about wine. You can guess. So when you taste a particular, so that's why vintages in Burgundy are very important. And I'm going to cover this in the next slide in the appellations. But if a vintage is good, where it was ripe enough so that plenty of tannins kind of showed up, that there's a lot of alcohol and the acidity is still there, so it will preserve it for longer, then you can potentially age a Pinot for, let's say, 30 years. I had the privilege of having 1976 Corton, which was still magical in spite of being, at the time, 40 years. It was 40 years old at the time. So it's still magical. But in other experiences, I would say probably up to 15 years is where where you get the most out of Pinot. So the ideal, when we talk about aging wines, it doesn't just mean let the wine sit there for as long as humanly possible, and then, you know, if it's 100 years old, it's still going to be amazing. No, it just goes up until a point. So, and then it starts dropping. So the wine stage is, it starts as grape juice, then it moves to wine, and then its next stage is turn into vinegar. So it always wants to become vinegar. So our goal is to catch it before it becomes vinegar, but long after it's only simple primary fruit flavors. So you want, like I said, with Pinot, you have these earthy characteristics that come with age. There's a little bit of floral flavors. There's like with an impressive Pinot Noir, you'll get like a freshly cut red rose flavor on the wine. But it's not going to happen when it's picked, when it's just been harvested. It's going to happen a few years down the line. So the magic of finding the right wine at the right time is it's hard. But that's what makes wine interesting. That's what makes it so romantic. It keeps you kind of on your toes, I guess. Okay. Don't know if I answered your question completely, but just to give you an idea. Okay. There's no actually correct answer. You cannot say, we just bottled this wine, it's going to be ready in exactly 7 years and 7 days. It doesn't exist. All right. So appellations and rules. Do you guys know what appellations actually are? Does anybody know what an appellation is? Or let's rephrase the question. Can you name an appellation?
Premier Cru, Grand Cru. No? There's a classification.
Yes, that's a classification.
DOC.
Yeah.
What did you say, Elena?
DOC.
DOC. That's again a classification. So an actual appellation sits within a classification. So for example, if a classification for Burgundy would be Grand Cru, an appellation would be one vineyard, so one Grand Cru within this. So what appellation basically is a generally designated geographical area from where this particular product comes from. The reason why I say product and not wine is because we know appellations in other products as well. I'm sure you know of a very famous cheese called Parmesan. Ever heard of that? So Parmesan is an appellation. Roquefort cheese, appellation. Cognac as a spirit, appellation. Right? So an appellation basically just means, or champagne is an appellation. Right? So an appellation is a geographical area from where the wines come from.
Chèvre Chambertin.
Chèvre Chambertin, exactly. So the reason why we want appellations, why appellations are a good thing, is coming back to what I touched on one of the previous sessions when I was saying it's all about customer understanding as well, right? So if these wines have been around for so long that they've developed a certain characteristics or cheeses or whatever. So if you want to make Parmesan cheese somewhere else, you can make it in a similar way, but it will never be exactly the same. Same as with the wine, you can try to make a Chèvre Chambertin style somewhere else, but it will never be exactly the same. It will not showcase the same sort of thing. So appellations are there to protect this consistency, to protect this name. It's basically like a branding thing, right? So if you want to have a successful brand, if you want people to constantly buy you, you need to consistently deliver high quality, right? Look at Apple, for example. Apple had, in the 80s, they had a great brand name. Everybody bought them. They were good products. They were expensive, but they were still good products. Then they dropped that quality. Nobody bought them. They almost went bankrupt. And then when they came back, they focused on quality, on consistency again, and they became one of the strongest brands that is in the world. So same thing happens with wine, right? So in Burgundy itself, we have 84. So AOC stands for Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée. So basically an appellation of controlled origin in literal translation. In Burgundy, they are divided into 4 tiers. So you have Appellation Régionale, Village, Premier Cru, and Grand Cru. So as the names would suggest, even though they're in French, I'm sure you can guess what they mean. So Régional means a regional appellation that covers a massive area of wine. The village appellation is a slightly smaller appellation, so it covers the vineyards right around the village. And then you have Premier Cru vineyards, which are first growth, let's say. So kind of very, very high quality wines. And then you have Grand Cru, which is the top of the top. So the very highest possible quality of wines. So to give you an idea of why they do this and how this is, so there's an image here. So this is how the vineyards are generally set. So the village is the one in the middle, the appellation communale. So all of the vineyards around that village have kind of a similar characteristic to it. On the right-hand side, you have appellation régionale, so regional flavor. So you can kind of expect, regardless of where it comes from in Burgundy, a wine should generally have some characteristics. Then when you add a little bit more complexity to it, you move into communal, and then even more, you move into the Premier Crus. So Premier Crus are the red ones, the red squares that you see kind of at the top of the hill and at the bottom of the hill. And then in the middle, you will have the Grand Crus. So the Grand Crus are basically the vineyards that are at the best possible position, where the elevation is perfect, drainage is perfect, soil composition is perfect, everything is just right, and it makes some really, really magical and really, really exceptional wines. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Coolio. All right, now to make things a little bit more complicated, like I said, Burgundy tends to be complicated. Inside of all of these Grand Crus, Premier Crus, villages, you have things called climat. So climat is basically a small designated area within a vineyard that actually has an even extra character to it. So when we talk about Grand Crus, a Grand Cru could have a sub-name or a subtitle, if you will, of a particular plot that it comes from, to showcase that, okay, this is a very special part of this very special vineyard. All right. The other thing is very similar, is a thing called lieux-dits.
Sorry?
Lieux-dits. So if you try to look at the presentation as well, if you can, to give you an idea of how these things are written. So lieux-dits are very similar. They're pretty much the same as the climat, but they're not designated. So nobody told them by law they can use this name, but nobody told them they can't either. So for example, some people know that the particular part of their vineyard tastes a little bit different, tastes a little bit better. So they will use that part of the name, but there's no real recognition for it. So theoretically, anybody could use it. Okay. That being said, Burgundians are very moral and ethical and sharp people, so they wouldn't just use it for the fun of it. So what can an appellation tell you to do? So like I said, the whole point of it is consistency. You want to deliver the same sort of wine year in, year out. So they can tell you which grapes you're allowed to grow. So for example, for most of the appellations in Burgundy, you are only allowed to grow either Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. There are a few exceptions that we're going to cover later. If there is a blending, such as Crémant de Bourgogne, so the sparkling wine of Burgundy, they can tell you how much you can blend of which of the grape, and so on. It can tell you how much you can harvest. So for example, so the reason why they would tell you this is, if you have a very, very good vintage in terms of volume, and a lot of your grapes grow a lot of fruit, this will kind of dilute the wine. So more is not more, less is more. So what they will do is they will, sometime in August, they will go in the vineyards and they will cut down the excess fruit, excess grapes. And what this will do is it will concentrate the vine itself to work more on just what is left. So instead of using energy on 10 grapes, it will use energy on 5 grapes. And what this will do is it will concentrate the flavors more. It will give them a little bit more support, right? So a bad example, but an example nonetheless. If you had 10 kids, it's probably not as easy to look after all of them equally as it is if you have 5 kids, right? So same principle here. So an appellation will tell you how much is the maximum yield, so to protect the quality and also the quantity, right? So there is a lot of people want to drink Burgundy, but if it's too much of it there, it will kind of dilute the market. It will make it less special and it will drop in price and so on. So it's all about that. They can tell you how old your vines can be, how dense you can plant the vines. So you have a few different approaches to vine density. So Burgundy is quite famous. There's quite a few people that do an extremely high density vine planting. And again, what this does is, again, similar to the 10 kids, it makes them fight a lot more. So wine is very much like people. I say this a lot. If you are born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you have everything handed to you throughout your life, you're most likely going to be pretty boring, not a lot of character in you. But if you had to work your way up, if you had to work hard, if you faced adversity all your life, you're probably going to have a pretty interesting character, a few pretty interesting stories. Same thing happens with wine. So if it has to fight for survival, it will generally produce better wines with more character, with more interests. So this is the approach of high density. If you put 10 kids next to one bowl, they're gonna have to fight to survive, and the weak will die, sorry. But the strong will be incredibly strong, right? The other approach would be to give them a lot of space, and what you would achieve with this is obviously get more nutrients. But if you did a low density planting, you would then restrict yields a lot. Again, coming back to the maximum yields from before, just to concentrate the flavors a lot more. All right, does this make sense so far?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. They can also tell you when to harvest. So they will generally give you a window of, okay, you are only allowed to harvest between the 7th of September and 20th of September. Again, the reason for this is consistency. If somebody wanted to pick, and they decide this on a year-by-year basis, it's not like it's always set in stone, right? So the people in charge of appellations are wine people. They are wine growers, winemakers, and so on. It's an association. So again, the reason for that is because, like I said, vintages are very important in France. They're not as important in New World, but in France they're important, and this is the reason. So they want to brand not only their vineyards, not only their regions, but they also brand their vintages. Again, this is a great marketing tool. And the only way you can brand a vintage is if everybody showcases the same things. So if you give people a window of 2-3 weeks, let's say, you know that all of the wines from this vintage will have that similar characteristics. If somebody were to extend that, somebody picked a little bit later, it would maybe have a lot riper style than others would, and it wouldn't be a representation of the vintage. All right. It can tell you vinification techniques as well, so what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, again, things like that. And similar to the harvesting, basically, they can tell you what the level of alcohol in the finished wine is. Most of the time, there will be minimum levels, not maximum levels. Generally, people do, I think, don't quote me on this because I didn't double check, but I think it's 11.5% for Pinot Noir, for example, and Chardonnay. All right, make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about the Grand Crus. Again, like I said before, I don't want to focus on the lower ranges. I want to focus on the higher ranges of wine in this session. And again, the reason for that is basically, we work in a serious industry where I'd like to think we tend to sell quite impressive, serious wines, and this is what we need to aspire to. If we're going to aspire to drinking entry-level wine, then there's no room to grow. So I'm going to talk about the Grand Crus of Burgundy. So there are 4 white wine Grand Crus, or 5, no, 4 actually. Okay, so the first one is the Montrachet. So Montrachet is this vineyard in the picture in front of you. It's quite interesting because it is, so you see that road in between? So it's not actually a road, that is actually a border. And it's a border between 2 villages. And if you look a little bit lower, you have Commune de Pouligny-Montrachet on the right and Commune de Chassagne-Montrachet on the left. So Pouligny and Chassagne are both villages, and they sit on other sides of the hill. In very broad terms, the Pouligny side tends to be a little bit stronger, a little bit more masculine, whereas the Chassagne side tends to be a little bit more feminine, a little bit lighter. Now, again, this is a very broad generalization, but just kind of an idea of what it is. So the vineyard of Montrachet is this one in the center. So while Puligny Montrachet has other Grand Crus as well, the Montrachet vineyard is only one, and it's called Le Montrachet. So why does it show in the names of both of the villages? So this is a very Burgundian thing, and I'll explain it later with the reds as well. But what they've done is that the actual village name is Puligny and Chassagne. But in Burgundy, all of the villages added the name of their very top vineyard to the name of the village. So again, all part of this branding thing to kind of develop a bigger understanding and to help promote the wines that are below it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so other vineyards in the hill, you've got the Chevalier Montrachet, you've got Bata Montrachet, you've got quite a lot of different Grand Crus over there. But like I said, Le Montrachet is the most impressive one. Not sure if you quite see this picture behind, but you see that it's cut up in quite a few different plots. You have DRC, you have Lafont, you have Bouchard, Laguiche. So these are all producers. So it's as you can see, there's only about 10 of them, or I think even less. So this makes it a very, very exclusive, a very, very rare wine. This wine is actually so rare that in 2015, I think, 15 or 16, the vintage was so poor that none of them could produce enough of wine to release. So for example, DRC that has probably about 1/8 of this vineyard, they couldn't even produce 1 barrel of wine. So what they had to do is all of these guys, apart from Laguiche, they had to join together and they put all of their grapes together and made one special unique wine together. So it's quite interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented, especially because they compete and they have very, very different style. And I can imagine that war room when they were trying to make the blend was pretty fun. But yes, they did make the wine. Nobody has seen it yet. It hasn't been released. They're keeping it. I reckon this is going to be one for the ages. It's going to be a very, very rare thing. Okay, anyway.
What vintage you said was it?
Sorry?
What vintage was it?
Have a look. I think it's 15 or 16, somewhere there. It's in the last few years, basically.
Just to know in case it's coming out, just to understand what vintage was.
If it comes out, it's going to cost about £5,000 a bottle, minimum.
Yeah, but just to look at the bottle is important.
So it's quite impressive. I had the privilege of trying a 2000 Montrachet from DRC, which is incredibly rare, but it was actually quite disappointing. But I thought it was going to be much more than it is. Sometimes you build something up in your head a little bit too much. Anyway, that's it. Moving on with white Burgundies. The second very, very important Grand Cru is Corton. Corton is in a little bit north of Montrachet. It is famous for being both white and red Grand Cru, which is quite interesting. There's not a lot of them. In fact, other than Corton, there's only one extra one. One thing I forgot to mention, and I should mention this with the white. So while Chassagne and Puligny are famous for their white wines these days, they were in fact red wine appellations for a very, very, very long time. And in fact, you can still find red wines coming from this region. They're quite rare. They're quite light and fresh. Not amazing, but they're very good juice and very good value if you want to have something really interesting. Anyway, back to Corton. Corton, like I said, it's a little bit further north. It produced a little bit more meatier, a little bit rounder, a little bit stronger wines than the Montrachet ones. So theoretically, Montrachet will be the most elegant Burgundy, white Burgundy you will find. Again, I'm generalizing. Don't say I said this and it's set in stone. Yeah. All right, the next one is Chablis Grand Cru. So Chablis is always a very interesting one because a lot of people think it's a different grape variety. It's not. Chablis is Chardonnay, same as everywhere else in Burgundy, even though Chablis is so far north that it's actually closer to Champagne than it is to the rest of Burgundy. So it's a very, very cool climate, very, very cold area actually. But what it's famous for is soils. So it has these Kimmeridgian soils. So Kimmeridge was one of the eras in prehistoric times. You've heard of Jura, for example. So Kimmeridge was one of the eras as well. And there's a lot of sediment, a lot of soil that is left over under the vineyards of Chablis. So that's why Chablis generally is a very, very mineral style of wines. Now, the interesting thing about Chablis is that you will see Chablis Grand Cru Le Clos, Chablis Grand Cru Vaugros, Chablis Grand Cru Blanchot. So you will find Chablis with its sub-name. So in essence, a lot of people think that Chablis has 8 different Grand Crus, but actually it only has 1 Grand Cru, and it is divided into 8 climats. So who can remind me what a climat is? Anyone?
It's
You good?
like a specific place of the vineyard, something like that.
Yes, is it designated or not designated?
Designated plots of the vineyard.
Designated, correct. So climats are designated, these are not designated. All right, so a very, very interesting thing. Basically, the Grand Cru hill of Chablis is just one hill right above the village. Really impressive thing, actually. All right, the last Grand Cru that is allowed for white wines in Burgundy is Musigny, more famously just for the reds, but there is a tiny bit of whites there as well. Not a lot of people actually make it, but it is allowed. All of the other Grand Crus that we're going to talk about now are solely red. So Burgundy has 33 Grand Crus, so 32 plus the Chablis one. Majority of them are reds. Now, we're not going to cover all of them because we don't have the time. We don't want to do this anyway, but it's a very interesting thing to cover at least some of the major ones. So one of the most important ones is Romanée-Conti. So the guy that's in the back over there, like I said, that's Aubert de Villeneuve, and he is the proprietor of an estate called Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. And I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more in a bit, but basically Romanée-Conti is a monopole vineyard, which I will also explain what it is. And it is one of the most expensive wines on the planet. When it releases, it never releases for less than £3,000 a bottle, ever. And to get it is incredibly hard. More importantly, there's a vineyard called La Romanée. So remember before I was saying that the villages that were adding the name of their top vineyards to the name of the village. So there is a village called Vaughan, and they've added the name of La Romanée, which is their top vineyard, to the name of the village. So the village is now called Vaughan Romanée. Second village is Gevrey, which is now called Gevrey Chambertin, which I'm sure you've all heard in terms of wine, right? You have Clos Saint-Denis, which has been added on to the village of Moret. So you have Moret Saint-Denis now. You have Echezeaux for Flagy Echezeaux. You have Corton for Alox Corton. You have Vougeot for the village of Vougeot, and that's it. So there's more vineyards, but these are the main ones that have added their names to the villages. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on the producer. So like I said, this is the guy that I want to talk about quite a bit. Like I said, the reason for it is because everybody tries to be him. When we talked about biodynamics the other day, we were talking about certifications and things like that. Now, the thing with Burgundy is most of Burgundy actually does biodynamics. It's not because they're trying to be trendy or whatever. The only reason for that is because they have always done it this way. And this is the reason why their wines are so expressive, why their wines are so good. And this guy is probably one of the best at doing it. However, you will never see it on his label. They will never talk about being biodynamic, being organic, being anything like that, because they only want their wines to speak for themselves. So the name is Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, and their two most famous vineyards are Romanée-Conti and La Tâche. So both of these vineyards are monopoles. So what is a monopole? A monopole is a vineyard that is owned by solely one owner. There is not, so like I said, in Burgundy, most of the vineyards are broken down because of that Napoleonic law. But there are a few exceptions, such as these two vineyards. And we are lucky to have, oh shit, you can see it. Oh, you can. one Latache over here. So this wine costs £6,000 in our shop. If you want to buy it, feel free. It's online. But like you will see on the bottles, you have this markings called Monopole on the top. I don't know if it's mirrored the image or not. But these wines are generally very, very, very impressive because if the owner has complete control over a vineyard, he can do whatever he wants with it. Okay. Anyway, have a look at this guy. Maybe do some research on him. He's very, very interesting. His approach to winemaking is very humble, and he lets the vines do most of the work for him. All right, one important guy is Domaine Le Fleuve as well. They're mostly famous for their whites, and their most famous wine comes from the Montrachet vineyard, from the Montrachet Grand Cru. Like I said, similar to the Romanée Conti guy, they couldn't produce any in whatever vintage it was, 15, 16. So they had to join forces. You should definitely think about Domaine Ponceau as well. They have a very, very beautiful portfolio of wines, and their top vineyard is Clos de Mont-Louison. So I'm just going to briefly run through these. Ideally, you would remember the names of the domains because, like I said, these are the names that pop up in conversation. If somebody talks about Burgundy and says, okay, if a supplier comes to you, or if a guest comes to you and says, I really like to drink Ponceau, you at least know who he's talking about, and you know exactly, okay, I don't have Ponceau, but this is the top Burgundy that I have, right? That makes sense. So Domaine de l'Ambre is famous as well, Comte Ligier Belair. This is also a monopole, La Romanée. So when I said before that they added it to the name of the village, I think in 80s, Comte Ligier Belair bought complete control over La Romanée. So he now also has a monopole of that. And the last one, quite important one, is Maison Le Roi. And I wrote Négoce under it. So Négoce is very different to a winery. A négoce or a négociant is basically a company or an individual that buys in grapes from other people, and he just has a winery. They don't own any vineyards. They just buy in grapes from other people, and they make the best that they can. Now, this is a very interesting approach, and there's quite a lot of it in Burgundy because the vineyards are so expensive. I think a couple of years ago they did an like a survey, and 1 hectare of vines in Burgundy, so 1 hectare is 100 by 100 meters, costs you £4.5 million pounds. So 1 hectare. So, and out of 1 hectare, you will probably get, I don't know, maybe 2,000 bottles, 3,000 bottles if you're lucky, something like that. So very expensive to own it. So there's a lot of négoce there, which is quite interesting. And Maison Le Roi has consistently produced some of the great wines, believe it or not. The reason for it is because Madame Le Roi used to work for Domaine de la Romanée Conti, where she learned. A lot of these guys have actually learned from him. He's very open to this. He wants the whole region to improve. So like I said, that's why I put him here. That's why he's kind of an idol for people that love Burgundy. All right. Enough about the top stuff. Let's talk about exceptions as well. So like I said, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, the main 2 grape varieties in Burgundy. And a lot of people think they're the only varieties in Burgundy, but that's not quite true. There is a few exceptions. The most important one is a grape called Aligoté. Aligoté actually used to be even more planted than the Chardonnay, and it's most famous for being a component in a cocktail called Kir. I'm sure you've all heard of Kir. So it's basically white wine with a touch of crème de cassis, so the blackcurrant syrup. They make cassis. They started making it in Dijon, and Aligoté is obviously grown just around there. The only appellation, like a regional appellation, that allows for Aligoté to be classified is Bouzeran, which is another village. Another grape variety is Gamay. So Gamay is allowed all over Burgundy. Not a lot of people grow it because it's quite a simple wine. Its job is to be delicious. Its job is just to be easy drinking, not necessarily a very impressive wine. But just to the south of Burgundy is Beaujolais, which I'm sure you've heard of before. They're famous for their Crus, Fleury, Bruy, Saint-Amour, and so on. Now, Beaujolais is a little bit of a weird one because in terms of wine, we generally talk about Beaujolais as part of Burgundy. But politically, Beaujolais is part of the Rhone Valley, which is a little bit further down south. In reality, Beaujolais is a completely region on its own. So I'm not going to talk about it today. We're going to cover it in one of the other sessions, but it's just so you know that sometimes people will mention Beaujolais as part of Burgundy as well. Now, the next grape is probably the most surprising one, and it is Sauvignon Blanc. So not a lot of people know this, but there is a tiny bit of Sauvignon Blanc allowed to be planted in Burgundy, and that's only in the village of Saint-Brie. Saint-Brie is next to this lovely city in the picture. This is Auxerre, beautiful city, close to Chablis. And Saint-Brie is between Chablis and Auxerre, sort of. It's a very tiny village on top of a hill, but they just make very, very cool, super cheap Sauvignon Blanc that is kind of a great alternative for Sancerres and Puy Fumés and things like that. So if you're ever looking for something like that, or if you see Saint-Brie, now you know it's Sauvignon Blanc. Another grape variety you can potentially find is César, similar to Saint-Brie. It comes from a village called Irancy, which is also in the same area, so Chablis, Auxerre type thing. It's a local grape variety. It's pretty rubbish, to be honest, but what it does is it adds a little bit of structure to a wine. So what they will generally do, they will make a wine out of Pinot, and they will add about 10% of César, because it is so far north, it is so cold up here that a wine would otherwise be quite undrinkable if it didn't have a bit of structure. So this is where César comes in. We have Bourgogne Rosé as well. So Bourgogne Rosé is made from 100% Pinot Noir. It can be grown pretty much anywhere in Burgundy. It's just a classic rosé, same as Côte de Provence. Generally tends to be a little bit more perfumed, but yeah, quite an interesting wine. You don't see much of it though. Again, if you can grow Pinot Noir, why would you make rosé if you can make a lot of money with making a good one? And last one in terms of Burgundy is the Crémant de Bourgogne. So Crémant is a term for all sparkling, all traditional method or champagne method sparkling wines produced in France outside of Champagne, right? So they're not champagne, but they're made in exactly the same way. In Burgundy, the most of sparkling production you will find next to the village of Châtillon, so in an area called Châtillonnais. Pinot Noir and Chardonnay obviously are the main grape varieties, and as you can see, I wrote down as well, it has to be a minimum of 30% of one of these grapes in a wine. They also add a little bit of Gamay or Aligoté, and there's a couple of others. There's a grape called Melon de Bourgogne, there's Sassy. There's a few other grapes as well, but they don't have any appellations that work for them. Cool. All right, guys, any questions about this so far?
No.
No? Cool.
No.
All right. Now, for the finish of today, we're going to talk a little bit about Champagne. Pretty impressive region, as I'm sure you all agree. And I really love this quote that I saw, that Champagne is the only wine that leaves a woman beautiful after drinking it. Hopefully I've had the privilege of seeing that. But yeah, if she drinks red wine, generally she's going to be on the floor somewhere. But after Champagne, she can still be pretty jumpy. All right, so other than the hot air balloon rides that are famous in Champagne, let's talk about why it actually started. So there's two reasons why Champagne started to be a sparkling wine. So the first reason was the wines were completely undrinkable. So it's so far north, you know, it's pretty much similar climate to what we have in London. So rubbish, you don't really see sun, other than of course the days that you're in quarantine. So wines tend to be very acidic, very sour, very, very fresh. So they figured out that with a second fermentation, they could solve this issue. They would make it a little bit softer, a little bit creamier, and just a little bit more drinkable. Now, the way it happened was kind of accidental in essence. So the weather was so cold up there that the wines that were put in a bottle, or sorry, in a barrel or whatever, they would stop fermentation halfway through because the temperature dropped so far, the yeast went to sleep. So over winter, there basically no fermentation happened. And then in the spring, when the weather warmed up a little bit, the yeast woke up again and they started a second fermentation. And what happened was that the bottles started exploding because suddenly all of this pressure built up in the bottles. So the problem was obviously in the cellar, one bottle exploded. It caused a chain effect, so you ended up losing your whole vintage. So finally, they figured out that why this is happening, and they started controlling it, and that kind of led to the invention of the second fermentation. Historically, Champagne was a red wine region. So I mentioned this in the other session, the guy Dom Perignon. So like I said, he was famous for a lot of tiny little things that he brought to the table. But one of the main things was he was actually fighting against planting any other grape than Pinot Noir. He wanted Pinot Noir to be the main grape. That's why even Dom Perignon these days is a Pinot Noir wine. But people wanted white, and white worked better with this second fermentation. So what he did was he invented a technique of how to make white wine out of red grapes. So that's kind of the main thing. So that's changed the production of Champagne from being a red wine region to dominantly, but still grown with red grapes, but making more white wines and obviously rosé. There is still an appellation called Coteaux Champenois, which stands for still wines made in Champagne. They can be both white, they can be both red. They're quite interesting, tend to be quite sour, very, very fresh, but they are an interesting thing to give it a go. We actually have one in the shop, so if you're ever interested, it's quite expensive. It's like 70 quid a bottle because it's still Champagne. But it's a pretty interesting experience to have a still wine from Champagne. All right, so just briefly through the method, I really hope all of you know this by now because we've talked about this a million times, I think. But basically, you start, so this is a very fun drawing of it. But basically, you start exactly the same way as with any other wine. You make the wine, a normal wine, and then you put it in a bottle. And once you have it in a bottle, then you add a little bit more sugar, a little bit more yeast, and you cork the bottle. So what this happens is this starts, intention starts that second fermentation I was talking about before. And as the second fermentation starts, guys, remind me, so what do the yeast produce? Two things.
CO
Alcohol and sugar.
and
Alcohol.
And so alcohol
CO2.
and CO2.
CO2, sorry.
So where before, when you were doing fermentation, you would do it in an open top vat, so that all of the CO2 would evaporate. When you put it here for the second fermentation, you put the cap on top of the bottle. So that CO2 is now trapped inside of the bottle. It has nowhere to go. It doesn't have a chance to evaporate. So with time, that CO2 starts blending in with the wine, and this is how we get the sparkling wine that we know today.
Lovely.
Now, by law, a minimum of 15 months needs to, the wine needs to stay inside of the bottle with the second fermentation for a minimum of 15 months. Again, the reason for this is just so it has enough time to really kind of blend with the wine. A lot of people will do this for even longer. Some people will do this for years and years and years before they pop that cork. Anyway, but the problem at this point is that now you've got these yeast cells, and like we said in the first session, yeast cells will procreate. They will keep on working until there is food. So until there is sugar in the wine, they will keep on living. But once they've eaten all of that up, they will die. And yeast cells are not invisible. They're actually quite visible. They're microorganisms, but they are, you know, if you've ever had yeast, if you've made bread, especially these days, you know what yeast looks like. And if you had that in your wine, I don't think you would really want to drink that wine if there was some bits floating in it. So Madame Veuve Clicquot, of the famous Chateau Veuve Clicquot, found a way of getting rid of this sediment inside. And the way they did this was with riddling. So they would basically they would put the bottle upside down and just kind of twist it every day a little bit by a quarter normally. And this would slowly slide all of the yeast cells inside of the neck here. So, and because the bottle was upside down, it looked like this. So you had beautiful wine up here and the little bit of yeast in here. So to get it out, what they did is they basically dunked the neck of the bottle in liquid nitrogen, so in basically instant ice. And as you know, ice expands as it freezes. Liquid expands as it freezes, and this caused that little bit, that the liquid with the yeast in the neck, to just pop out. So this reduced any kind of waste that you would have from the wine. There was only a tiny bit left in the wine, and you had a clear wine with no sediment inside of it. Now you still lost a little bit of wine, and as anybody will tell you, if you try to sell an English person a wine that isn't completely topped up to the top, they will send it back. And England was the main market for champagne. They had to top it up somehow. So in those days, they used to top up with grape juice. So a plain sweet grape juice. Now in the past, champagne used to be very, very, very sweet. In the last 20 years, we've grown more towards the drier styles. So right now, the brut style is kind of the most popular, which means up to 12 grams of sugar per liter. 50 years ago, it was 40 grams of sugar. So that's like a Coke. So champagne champagne used to taste like a Coke. Anyway, this process, when they put the yeast out, is called disgorgement. And you can sometimes see this on the bottle of champagne as well. They will write the date of disgorgement. So this will tell you how long the wine has actually been sitting on the yeast, because yeasts also add flavor, right? Same as in your bread tastes yeasty, your beer tastes yeasty. And this gives flavor to the wine as well. So champagne can often be characterized as having brioche, bready kind of flavors. And it's quite an interesting one. And again, it made the wines more drinkable. Okay, make sense?
Yep.
All right. There is a few different ways of people doing champagne. So first of all, you have Negociant Manipulant. So you don't really have to remember all of this, but just to give you an idea of that, there are other ways of making it. So Negociant Manipulant basically means you are a champagne house, right? So the champagne houses are Dom Pérignon, Veuve Clicquot, Lenart, Pommery, so on and so forth. So basically, they either buy in or grow in their own grapes. They make their wine in their own winery under their own label. Then you have Récoltant Manipulant, which is a grower. So basically, a normal farmer, he makes grapes only from his own vineyards, and he makes them in his own winery. So he's not a big house, he's just a tiny little farmer. So on the bottles, it will say RM, so Récoltant Manipulant, but most of the time, especially in England, we will call them growers or grower champagne. Then you have Récoltant Coopérateur, so basically a cooperative grower. You have a proper cooperative, then you have Société de Récoltant. Anyway, a load of these different people. The only one you kind of need to remember is also the MA, the Marque d'Acheteur. So the reason why I need to know this is because you will see a lot of these in supermarkets. So Tesco, for example, they will go to Veuve Clicquot and they will tell them, can you make us our own brand champagne? And they will do it for them. So obviously Veuve Clicquot doesn't want to put their name on that, let's admit it, poor quality of champagne. So it has to have an MA. So in theory, this is kind of like a I don't know, classification level of sorts, right? Briefly through the important champagne producers. So you've got the famous houses. So like I said, the main part of the production, most of the production comes from the famous houses. You've heard of pretty much all of them: Renard, Dom Pérignon, Veuve Clicquot, Moët Chandon, Pommery, Bollinger, Paulager, Deutz, and Louis Roederer. And there's a few other ones that should be famous. So these are either smaller houses or growers or so on. have a look at this file later on. Have a look at these guys. These are some of the most incredible champagnes on the planet. So complex, so interesting, and some impressive characters, especially the guy called Jacques Selos. He's the third guy down there. He's a really fun guy if you want to look at some of his interviews or so on. All right, any questions on champagne?
Do we have them in the shop?
Some. We have.
The right list, I mean.
Which one?
The right list.
Some. Not enough. I wish we had more. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of contracts with the guys on the left that pay us money.
Oh well. Business.
All right. So that's it for today. It was a little bit long. I'm sorry for that, but it was kind of a big topic. Now there's one new thing, and if you see, there's a few links below there. So Berg map I showed you the other day, where you can see all of the vineyards and who owns them and where the Grand Crus and Premier Crus and so on. A very interesting source of materials is Bourgogne wines. I go there all the time. I get a lot of my information from there, especially when it comes to Burgundy. And the last one is a very interesting one. So I had 2-3 hours yesterday, and I've decided to set up a quick website. It's ugly, but it works. So let me just show you what's on there.
Did you actually do a website for yourself?
Well, to be fair, I didn't do it for myself. I did it for you guys because I'm super old. And the reason why I did
Have you got a logo already?
No, can you make me one?
I'll get James Barnard for you.
All right, shut up now. So the reason why I did it is because I've got the materials up here, so you can now download you've got Burgundy here, so the session from today you can download, and the one that I did the other day. I didn't have time for everything. It's not like, whipping up a website is in instant. But you've also got some quizzes, so you can play around. I will make more as I have time, but
Nice.
there's only 10 or 11 questions in here. So have a go with them. Hopefully they will help you out. I will try to update this as much as I can. Obviously, I'm a little bit busy, but this is it. Okay?
Thank you.
Nice. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Amazing.
All right. If you have any other questions, I'm going to stick around for another couple of minutes, and the rest of you can go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Oh, also, I might upload these sessions now on the website as well, so you can go back.
Cool.
Lenart, I tried last day to send you an email, but I think you didn't receive it.
Definitely didn't receive it. Where did you send it?
The one that you
Camera
gave to me. Yeah.
No, I didn't get anything. What was it about?
I was the one that you upload now on the system, so.
Okay, yeah. You have these two. I will add the other ones as well. Like I said, when I get a chance, I need to rewrite them up. I need to make them a little bit better. So especially the first one, you'll see the Rare Academy one. It's literally just bullet points of what I needed to go through. This one, Burgundian one that I did yesterday, was a little bit more informational, I guess. But mainly why you should use these as materials is more for yourself to see what you need to research more, if that makes sense. Right? So you look at it and, okay, I didn't quite get what he said. Let me look into this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Lenart, I got a question about the appellation.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that because of the climate change, the current climate change, potentially could mess up or change the way the appellations rules are laid out, or?
Absolutely, it's already happening. So Bordeaux was one of the first ones. So Bordeaux is as French as it gets, and the French always know what's right.
Yeah.
But they were smart enough to realize that this is potentially, it could happen. So they've approved new grape varieties that are now allowed in Bordeaux. One of them is Touriga Nacional, which is a Portuguese grape variety, and you know how painful that is for the French to allow that. But they don't think that their current grape varieties are going to be future proof. So they're already doing it. Burgundy hasn't yet, but I suspect there is potential for maybe a Viognier to be allowed in the future.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
do you know if the grapes actually are changing their characteristics because of the climate change? Is it something tangible that people are talking about it, or not really?
Grapes are same as everything else. Everything adapts. Grapes are not the same today as they were 10 years ago. And yes, part of it is climate change. Part of it is just cultivating it. I mean, everything affects it. In Spain, for example, you have a grape variety called Tempranillo, which I'm sure you've heard of. It used to be, so the same grape is grown in Toro, which is another region in Spain. But they lived apart. They have had no connection between each other. There's quite a lot of distance between them, and there's very different soil. So the Tempranillo in Toro has completely changed. It tastes completely different. It feels completely different. It reacts completely different because it adapted to the environment that was there.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, yes, you can attribute it to the climate change, but it's actually everything, right? It changes because of, same as you. People aren't the same. We used to have big foreheads, and we walked on our.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to describe wines as emotional.
Yeah.
When it does change.
It does. They're very fussy, and they taste different. I can tell you this. I mean, sometimes you try the same wine 2 days in a row, and they are completely different wines.
Yeah, that's why it's so fascinating.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun. That's what, I mean, look, I get bored very quickly. So this is what kind of dragged me into wine, because it's very hard to get bored of wine. I get bored of wine people, not of wine.
Cool. Thank you, Lenart.
No worries.
All right. When's the next session?
Next session, Tuesday, we're doing Bordeaux.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Bye.
Lena, can you show me your website again, because I can't find it on...
LenartSenelids.com. Very simple. I didn't complicate it.
No, for some reason I can't find it on Google.
You're not gonna find it. I put it up yesterday, mate. It's not on Google yet.
It needs another million click for that.
Yeah. Maybe after today, when all of you massively go on it, maybe I should put some ads there so we make some money. No, it won't be there. So just Lenart, and I see my name over there, no dot in between, just that.com. Cool. Anything else, guys?
No, that's all.
Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
Next week.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.